Hey, dear members of the Soul and Real Stories family, today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Chapter 1. Cold Waves. By the shore, Havenport in the summer was a living painting, a place where gentle waves caressed golden shores, and the lights of dock yachts shimmered like fallen stars on the water surface. This small town, nestled along the northern coast of the U.S., held the peaceful beauty of the ocean, while embracing the modern rhythms of the wealthy visitors who arrived on their luxurious boats. The salty sea breeze drifted through the cobblestone streets, went from the harbor to the town center, where waterfront bars like sea breeze glowed late into the night. The laughter of tourists blended with the steady pulse of the waves. Under the fading hues of dusk, Havenport seemed like a paradise, yet to Sarah Colton it was nothing more than a gilded cage, a place where she had been trapped for the past 2 years, with no way out. Sarah, 26, stood behind the bar at Sea Breeze, her hands moving swiftly as she mixed a mojito for an old sailor seated in the corner. Her golden hair, as bright as beach sand under the sun, was tied up with a faded blue ribbon, revealing the delicate curve of her neck, usually hidden beneath a simple apron she wore. During her shifts, her deep blue eyes, once described by her late mother as the very color of Havenport's sea, vivid, full of life and hope, were now veiled with a quiet sadness. She carried herself with resilience, her shoulders squared, her stance steady like the coastal pines that braced against the sea winds. But inside she was crumbling, a soul slowly breaking apart, imprisoned by loneliness and self-doubt she couldn't bring herself to face. 2 years ago, Sarah had married Mark Colton, a rough-edged dock worker with unkempt dark hair and calloused hands hardened from years of hauling ropes and securing cargo ships. They lived in a small wooden house near the harbor, where the scent of aged timber and briny air seeped into every corner. A home Sarah once hoped would be a sanctuary. Now it was nothing more than a cold, empty space. Mark had never touched her, not even though they shared the same old double bed in their cramped bedroom. 2 years of marriage, and Sarah was still a virgin, a bitter truth she kept buried like an open wound, one that bled. Every night she lay beside him, listening to his steady snores while her heart remained hollow. There was always an excuse. "I'm exhausted, Sarah. The docks were a nightmare today. I drank too much. Let's do this tomorrow." Then he'd turn away, leaving her to long, sleepless nights, wondering what was wrong with her. Was she not beautiful enough, not desirable enough to ignite even the smallest spark in her own husband? Tonight, like every other night, Sarah stood behind the Sea Breeze bar, bathed in the soft yellow glow of rope-hung lanterns. The small bar, with its dark wooden walls and large windows overlooking the sea, was her refuge. From the suffocating silence of home, the clinking of glasses, the distant crash of waves, and the murmured conversations of customers offered her a temporary escape from the ache weighing at her soul. It wasn't a busy night. Only a handful of patrons lingered, an old sailor in a frayed cap spinning whale tales to a fellow seafarer, and a young couple nestled by the window whispering sweet words under dim lighting. Sarah wiped the counter with an old cloth, her movements mechanical, though her mind was elsewhere, drifting back to the days before she married Mark, the days when she still believed love could change everything, and the reason she had chosen him as her husband. Sarah had never been in love with Mark. She had met him at Sea Breeze, where he was a regular, often occupying the corner booth with his dock worker friends, drinking beer and swapping harbor stories. Mark was not a romantic man, not gentle, nor particularly kind. He was rough, blunt, to the point of being abrasive, and at times his words irritated her, but he was steady and back. Then Sarah had desperately needed something stable to hold on to at 23. She had just lost her mother to illness. Her father, a retired ship mechanic, had drowned his grief in alcohol, retreating into a silence so thick it felt like he had abandoned her to the Colton family. Once one of Havenport's proudest lineages of strong marriages and unwavering bonds, was now nothing more than a fractured shadow of its former self. Sarah felt lost, unmowed. She needed an escape, someone to lean on, someone to help her rebuild the home she had lost. Mark had appeared at the right time. His attempts at courting her had been clumsy but persistent, buying her beer after her shifts, telling her terrible jokes, sometimes leaving behind a wildflower on the counter with a sheepish grin. Sarah had never felt swept off her feet by him, but he was solid, relaxable, and at a time when her world was crumbling that had seemed like enough. So when he proposed after only 3 months with a simple silver ring bought from his savings, Sarah said yes, not out of passion, but because she believed Mark could be her safe harbor, that in time love would come, that her devotion would mold him into the kind of husband she dreamed of, the kind who would hold her at night, whispering loving words as they built a life together. But weeks before their ring, she discovered Mark had been involved with Lisa, a dancer from the Rusty Anchor, a rowdy harbor bar notorious for its cheap liquor and even cheaper affections. It was a late night when she found out Sarah had been walking past the Rusty Anchor picking up a shipment for Sea Breeze, when she spotted Mark leaving the bar with Lisa. His arm was slung around the woman's waist, and the way he smiled at her, so easy, so eager, was a look Sarah had never seen directed at herself. The next day, she confronted him. Tears stained her face as she choked out, "Mark, do you love her? Why would you do this to me?" Mark had dropped to his knees, grasping her hands, his voice desperate. "I was wrong, Sarah. I'll end it with Lisa. I choose you. I want to marry you." And in her naive, grief-clouded heart, she had believed him. Believed that if she loved him enough, if she cooked the meals he liked, washed his clothes, waited for him late into the night, he would come back to her completely, that one day he would look at her the way he had looked at Lisa that night, that their home would become what she had always dreamed, a place where Mark would return after long shifts, wrapping his arms around her as she cooked dinner, where he would whisper to her beside the fireplace on cold winter nights, where she would finally feel like she belonged to someone, like she was enough. But 2 years had passed and their home remained silent, a house filled with emptiness, cold, older than the sea breeze that crept through its wooden walls. And Sarah was still waiting for a man who had never truly wanted her, waiting for a love that would never come. And deep down, beneath all her denial, she knew she had married a man who would never love her the way she longed to be loved. But 2 years had passed, and that dream had dissolved like seafoam on Havenport shores. Mark had grown colder, distant. He didn't touch her, didn't look at her with love or even the curiosity of a newlywed husband. Most nights he stumbled home late, reeking of alcohol from the Rusty Anchor, his eyes bloodshot, his words clipped, "Don't bother me, Sarah, I'm tired." Then he'd pass out on the couch, leaving her alone in their double bed, clutching a pillow as she stared at the wooden ceiling, wondering if Lisa was still in his life, or if he simply didn't want her. Sarah had tried. She had cooked his favorite meals like grilled fish and potato pancakes, had worn the summer dresses he once complimented before they were married, had whispered soft words when he was sober, hoping to reach him. But it was all useless. Mark never came back to her, not in the way she had hoped. He remained a stranger in the bed beside her, and Sarah began to wonder, had she been a fool to believe her devotion could change him? Had she been wrong to marry him, seeking only the illusion of safety when she was at her most lost? Tonight everything shattered. When Sarah returned home, a fragile hope flickered inside her, that maybe, just maybe, Mark would be there, that he would talk to her like a husband should. But when she stepped into their small wooden house, she found him standing in the kitchen, his bloodshot eyes dark. With something final on the table lay a stack of papers. Divorce papers. He tossed them in front of her, his voice cold. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah Layton." "And it's Sarah Ross." Her fingers tightened around the canvas bag she used for carrying home her bar supplies. Her mind spun with 1,000 questions. He's really done with me. 2 years weren't enough for him to change. But the only words she managed were, "We can try harder, Mark. I did everything for you." Her voice trembled, not from heartbreak, but from the dread of facing failure, of facing her family, of facing the town's whispers that she couldn't keep her husband, that she was a disgrace to the Colton family, who prided themselves on marriages that never fell apart. Mark let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You were nothing but a placeholder, Sarah. I'm done pretending." Then he turned and walked away, no hesitation, no second thoughts. The wooden door slammed behind him, echoing through the small house like a final blow, hammering away the last shred of hope Sarah had clung to for 2 years. She stood motionless, hands trembling, Staring down at the papers, the cold printed words confirmed what she had refused to see, that all her efforts, all her sacrifices, meant nothing. Mark had never truly belonged to her, not even before they were married. Lisa, or whoever else had come before and after her, was a ghost Sarah could never chase away, and she had been foolish to believe her one-sided love could change him, to have married him out of fear of loneliness after losing her mother, to have clung to him thinking he could be her anchor when her world was falling apart. Sarah couldn't stay in that house another second. She grabbed her bag, ignoring the ache in her legs from her earlier shift, and walked straight to Sea Breeze for the night shift. The bar had always been her escape, the place where the clink of glasses and the steady rhythm of the waves drowned out the pain gnawing at her heart, if only temporarily. The familiar scent of aged wood and cool air from the AC greeted her as she stepped inside. Tonight was quiet. Only a few patrons remained. An old sailor in a worn-out cap spinning talls of whales to his drinking buddy, a young couple murmuring sweet nothings by the window. Sarah tied on her apron, her hands moving on autopilot as she prepared drinks, but her gaze drifted to the ocean through the large window. Where did I go wrong? 2 years of trying, and I still wasn't enough. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she bit her lip, freeing them down. In Havenport, weakness wasn't something she could afford to show, not to her family, not to the people who once called her the town's golden girl. The bar had nearly emptied by midnight. Only a few sailors lingered in the back, nursing their beers as they swapped stories of the sea. Sarah wiped down the counter one last time, preparing to close up, when the wooden door of Sea Breeze swung open. A rush of cool ocean air swept inside. She looked up, and a man walked in, tall, dressed in a crisp white button down, the top few buttons undone, revealing sun-kissed skin. His dark brown hair was tousled as if the wind had just run through it, and his deep blue eyes, like the ocean in its most mysterious depths, scanned the room before settling on her. Julian Vance, 35, CEO of Vance Yachts, a luxury yacht company that had recently opened a branch in Havenport. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who belonged to the sea, a striking blend of untamed freedom and sharp business acumen. He strode to the bar, placing strong hands on the wooden counter, his lips curving into a slow, easy smile. "Whiskey, please." His voice was deep, smooth, like waves crashing against the shore, and Sarah couldn't ignore the pull of it. She nodded, reaching for the whiskey bottle behind her, willing her hands to stay steady. She could feel his gaze on her, not indifferent like Mark, not the fleeting interest of the usual bar patrons, but curious, steady, as if he saw something beyond the surface. When she placed the glass in front of him, he lifted a brow. "Working this late doesn't wear you down?" Sarah kept her voice casual. "I'm used to it," but something in her expression must have slipped a flicker of sadness, because Julian, like a man who could read the tides, seemed to notice instantly. He took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Eyes never leaving her. Havenport is beautiful," he mused, "but you don't seem to belong to that peaceful beauty." It was a statement, not a question. Something about it made Sarah exhale, a quiet, tired laugh escaping her lips. Maybe on just part of the cage. She didn't know why she admitted it. Maybe because he was a stranger, someone who didn't expect anything from her, one who wouldn't judge. Julian tilted his head, amusement flickering in his ocean blue gaze. "Cages can be broken if you want them to be." Then he stood, pulling a few crisp bills from his pocket and setting them on the counter. But before he left, he turned back, holding her gaze with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You have eyes that tell stories, Sarah. Don't let them stay sad forever. Welcome to Soul Stories." Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave I am happy in the comments. If you agree, subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. Chapter 2: The Southeast. Breeze through the soul. Sarah stood behind the bar at Sea Breeze, the warm golden light from the rope-hung lanterns casting a soft glow on her face. For the first time in what felt like forever, a small spark had returned to her ocean blue eyes. Not much, just a flicker of something rare and fragile, something awakened by a man who had walked into the bar 2 nights ago outside Havenport, remained as tranquil as ever. The steady rhythm of waves crashing against the shore, the salty breeze whispering through the cracks of the old wooden door. But inside Sarah, a quiet storm was brewing, not the storm of despair she had grown so familiar with over the past 2 years. No, this was something else. Something new, a sliver of hope tangled with fear, a feeling she didn't yet dare to name. 2 days had passed since Mark had thrown divorce papers onto the kitchen table and walked out, leaving her standing there watching the last remnants of her marriage crumble like a house built on sand. Sarah hadn't signed the papers yet, not because she still loved Mark, but because of her family name. She had been raised to believe that the Colton family stood for strength, for unbreakable bonds. Her father, Thomas Colton, had been a revered ship mechanic, his hands once known as golden, capable of fixing anything that touched the waters of Havenport. Her mother, Margaret, had been the heart of the community, hosting warm gatherings that made the town feel like home. And Sarah, she had once been Havenport's golden girl, the one who was meant to carry on the family's legacy of enduring marriages. Now her father drowned himself in alcohol, grieving the loss of her mother, and Sarah, at 26, was about to become the first woman in her family to be left by her husband. She feared the whispers of the townsfolk, the disappointed look in her father's eyes, if he ever sobered up long enough to notice. She feared losing the only thing she had left from her happy childhood, her family's honors. Sarah wiped down the bar with slow, deliberate motions, her hands moving out of habit. While her mind drifted, she still wore the same simple blue apron, her blonde hair pulled up into a high ponytail. But tonight she was not the quiet shadow mixing drinks and silence. Every few minutes she found herself glancing at the wooden door of Seabraze, the same door Julian Vance had walked through 2 nights ago. Julian Vance, a man who carried himself like the sea, wild, untamed yet effortlessly powerful. She had heard whispers from the dock workers that he was the CEO of Vance Yachts, a luxury yacht company that had recently expanded into Havenport. But that wasn't what stayed with her. What lingered was the way his deep blue eyes, darker than her own, had locked onto hers with an intensity that unsettled her. The way his voice, smooth and low like the tide rolling over the shore, had said, "Cages can be broken if you want them to be." That sentence had echoed in her mind ever since, a question she hadn't dared to answer. Tonight's sea breeze was livelier than usual. A few sailors gathered in the back corner, and a group of tourists from the luxury yacht stocked nearby filled the tables by the window, laughing over their drinks. Sarah poured a gin and tonic for a regular, her hand steady, but her mind far from calm. She thought of Mark Dash, the husband she had spent 2 years trying to hold on to. She thought of the night she had stayed up waiting for him to come home, believing that love could be built from patience and sacrifice. She had cooked the meals he liked, grilled fish drizzled with lemon, soft and buttery potato pancakes. She had waited, hoping that one day he would wrap his arms around her and tell her she was enough. But Mark never had. He had come home late, drunk on cheap whiskey, mumbling half-hearted apologies. Before collapsing onto the couch, she had lain awake in their bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had ever stopped loving Lisa, the woman he had never truly left behind. But everything was different now. When Mark had thrown those divorce papers in front of her, he hadn't begged for forgiveness, hadn't even pretended to care. He had just walked away. And what hurt wasn't losing him, it was what people would say about her failure, that Havenport's golden girl hadn't been good enough to keep her husband. Sarah exhaled sharply, shaking the thoughts from her mind as she set the gin and tonic on the counter. Then instinctively her gaze flickered to the door again. She hadn't signed the papers yet, hadn't admitted, at least to herself, that she had wasted 2 years of her life chasing something that had never been real. But Julian's words haunted her. Don't let them stay sad. For the first time in years, someone had seen her, not with apathy, not with judgment, but with curiosity, with understanding. A gust of cool sea air swept into the bar. The wooden door swung open and Sarah's heart stuttered. Julian Vance had returned. He looked just as he had that first night, tall, confident, the first few buttons of his white shirt undone, revealing sun-kissed skin, his dark brown hair touzle, as if he had just stepped off the deck of a ship. His deep blue gaze swept across the room before landing on her, and then he smiled a slow, knowing smile. "Another whiskey or mix?" His voice was smooth, effortlessly captivating. And despite everything, Sarah found herself returning his smile just slightly. She nodded, reaching for the whiskey bottle behind her, aware of the weight of his gaze this time. Her hands weren't entirely steady. Julian settled onto the bar stool, resting his forearms against the counter. "Livelier tonight," he noted casually. Sarah nodded. "Summer crowds the yachts, bring in more tourists." He took a sip of whiskey, watching her. "You've been working here long, 3 years, she replied. Then, before she could stop herself, "Before I got married." She wasn't sure why she had said it, but Julian didn't seem surprised, didn't even react, as if it wasn't important, as if Mark wasn't important. They talked at first. It was about drinks, mojitos, whiskey blends, the kind of liquor she preferred. But then Julian shifted the conversation, his voice dipping into something softer. "I've sailed across the world," he said, his gaze brightening slightly, "from hidden Caribbean coves to the wild shores of Alaska. Out there, no one judges you, no one traps you, just the waves, the wind, and freedom." Sarah listened, drawn in like a child hearing a fairy tale. She had never left Havenport. Her life had always revolved around her family. Then Mark. She had never once considered the horizons Julian spoke of then, his voice lowered. "Have you ever thought about living for yourself?" The word struck something deep inside her. Her fingers curled around the cloth she had been using to wipe the counter. She wanted to say no, to keep her pain buried, but Julian's presence, his words, felt like the sea wind peeling away the layers she had built around herself. "My husband wants a divorce," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, nearly lost in the sound of the waves. "But I haven't signed yet. I thought if I was good enough, if I waited long enough, he'd come back." She stopped, swallowing hard against the tears threatening to spill. Julian didn't look at her with pity, only understanding. "You deserve more than that, Sarah." His voice was warm, steady. "There's an entire world beyond this town. Place is where no one knows your name, no one tells you how to live. Don't let them cage you." He stood, finishing his drink, and placed a folded note on the counter. "I'm here if you need someone to listen." Then he walked out, leaving Sarah standing there, hard, unsteady, mindful of crashing waves. She lowered her gaze, gripping the small piece of paper with trembling fingers, before carefully unfolding it. A short, handwritten note stared back at her. "Julian, 55. 550,123. Sarah stared at the numbers, her heart pounding as thoughts swirled in her mind, thoughts of everything she had missed. 2 years spent inside a gilded cage of family honor, 2 years trying to please a man who never truly wanted her, 2 years wasting away when out there beyond Havenport, beyond Mark, there were wonders she had never dared to dream of. Julian's words echoed in her mind. "Mind cages can be broken if you want them to be." She slipped the note into the pocket of her apron, her gaze drifting toward the ocean through the window. For the first time, she felt a new kind of longing, not to hold on to Mark, but to escape him. The night shift ended. Sarah walked home, stepping into the small wooden house that was now filled with nothing but silence. Mark lay sprawled on the couch, fast asleep, an empty beer bottle rolling on the floor. Not a single sign that he had cared, not about her, not about the divorce papers he had thrown at her the night before. She stood there watching him, and the memories came rushing back. The time she had caught him sneaking around with Lisa before their wedding, the countless nights she had waited up for him, hoping he would come home and see her, the morning she had blamed herself, wondering if she wasn't good enough to make him love her. But now she saw it clearly. Mark had never wanted her, not because of who she was, but because his mother had forced him to marry her, to wed Havenport's golden girl, a respectable Colton, a wife who would elevate his standing in town. And she, blinded by grief and longing, had let him, had convinced herself that love could grow from duty. But there was nothing left now, just ashes. Sarah stepped into the bedroom. She reached into her bag, pulled out the divorce papers, and sat at the desk. She unfolded Julian's note, setting it beside the cold, impersonal document. Her eyes flickered between the two, between Mark's scrolled signature and Julian's casual, almost careless handwriting, between a past that had imprisoned her and a future she hadn't yet dared to grasp. Julian's voice echoed in her mind. "You deserve more than this. With unsteady fingers, she picked up the pen, and she signed her name. Every stroke of ink felt like a blade severing the invisible chains that had bound her for the past 2 years. When she finally put the pen down, she exhaled a deep, trembling breath, as if for the first time in years she could finally breathe. Sarah remained standing at the bar, her heartbeat unsteady, her grip still tight around the damp cloth she had been using to wipe the counter. That first night, like a quiet ripple in the vast ocean, had marked the beginning of something she wasn't ready to name. But inside her, beneath years of cold and silence, a spark had been lit. A fire. Mark had never ignited a fire that, for the first time in a long time, refused to die. Chapter 3: Freedom over a glass of whiskey. Sarah stood behind the bar at sea breeze, the soft golden glow from the rope-hung lanterns casting a warm light over her face. Her ocean blue eyes held something new tonight, a glimmer of something fresh, yet beneath it lingered an emptiness she couldn't quite name. Outside, Havenport remained as peaceful as ever, the rhythmic crashing of waves beyond the large window, the salty breeze slipping through the cracks of the old wooden door. But inside Sarah, a different kind of storm brewed. A week had passed since she had signed the divorce papers, since she had finally stepped out of the gilded cage of family honor and Mark Colton's cold indifference. Freedom something she had longed for during countless lonely nights had finally come. Yet it didn't bring her the joy she had imagined. Instead, she felt like a ship set adrift at sea, no anchor, no destination, only the vast, quiet emptiness stretching before her. The divorce had been finalized within days of her first meeting with Julian Vance at Sebers. Mark had barely reacted, no arguments, no second thoughts. He had signed the papers with the same indifference. He had treated their marriage like she was nothing more than an object he had grown tired of. And then he had left their small wooden house without so much as a goodbye. Sarah hadn't cried when he walked out, not the way she once thought she would. She had already shed too many tears over him, had already hoped too much, and now that the door to her marriage had finally closed, she was left with an emptiness she didn't yet know how to fill. She still worked at Sebers, still mixed cocktails with practiced hands, still smiled at customers out of habit, but inside she kept wondering, is this what freedom feels like? Why does it feel so lonely? Sarah wiped down the bar, her movements slow and deliberate, her gaze drifting over the bottles lining the shelves, as if searching for an answer. She still wore the same simple blue apron, her blonde hair tied high, but something had changed, something had shifted. A tiny spark had been lit within her, a spark Julian had unknowingly ignited that night when he left her that small piece of paper with the words, "I'm here if you need someone to listen." She had kept the note tucked inside her apron pocket. She hadn't called, hadn't dared to, but every time her fingers brushed against the folded paper, she felt a strange warmth, like a promise carried by the sea breeze. Sea breeze was busier than usual tonight. A few sailors huddled in the corner laughing over tales of the ocean. A group of tourists from the luxury yachts nearby sat by the window sipping drinks and snapping photos of the night sky. Sarah mixed a margarita for a regular, her hand steady, but her mind restless. She thought of Mark the man she had spent 2 years caring for, the man who had married her not out of love, but because his mother had wanted him to marry someone respectable, a Colton, a golden girl from the town's most respected family. She didn't want to replay the memories, didn't want to relive the pain, but it was all still there, too clear, too raw. She had given him everything, had sacrificed so much to keep him, and in the end, all she had gotten in return was his coldness and a divorce thrown in her face. Like an afterthought, Sarah set the margarita on the counter, then almost instinctively her eyes flicked toward the wooden door. Julian had become a regular since that first night, always showing up toward the end of her shift, as if it were an unspoken tradition. But he didn't just order whiskey anymore. He brought with him stories of the sea cocktails he had learned from bars around the world, and a kind of pursuit so subtle yet so steady that Sarah wasn't sure whether it made her nervous or made her want more. Just last night, he had made her a playful smile on his lips as he slid the glass toward her. Good, he had asked, watching her take a sip. "I learned this from a bar, Hawaii." Sarah had nodded, a rare smile forming on her lips, and for a fleeting moment she had felt seen, not as Mark's ex-wife, not as Havenport's golden girl, just her. The wooden door swung open, a cool breeze rushing, and Sarah looked up, and her heart skipped. Julian Vance had arrived, tall, confident, wearing that same white button down the top, few buttons undone, revealing sun on bronze skin. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled, and his deep blue gaze swept across the room before settling on her. He walked to the bar, placing his strong hands on the counter, a slow smile tugging at his lips. "One whiskey." His voice was smooth, easy, then with a glint of mischief. "And one drink for you, my mix." His confidence was effortless, and despite herself, despite the wall she had built, Sarah found she couldn't say no. Sarah nodded, grabbing a bottle of whiskey and a few ingredients from the shelf, placing them in front of him. Julian rolled up his sleeves, his movements effortlessly smooth as he mixed gin, lemon juice, and a dash of cream to Violet. His deep blue eyes flicked up to meet hers from time to time. "This is an aviation," he said, pushing the pale violet cocktail toward her. "Try it, it's light like the sea breeze." Sarah took a sip, the tangy sweetness blooming across her tongue, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "It's really good." Julian smirked. "I knew you'd like it." They talked as they had on previous nights, but tonight something was different. An unspoken closeness was forming between them. Julian spoke of a trip to the Mediterranean, describing the shimmering waves under the golden sun, the quiet night spent gazing at stars from the deck of a ship. Sarah listened, captivated like a lost soul, finding warmth in his words, and then he paused. His gaze locked onto hers, steady and unrelenting. "Now that you're free, what do you want?" The question stole the breath from her lungs. Her fingers tightened around the delicate stem of her glass. She had never said it out loud before, never admitted it, not even to herself. But tonight, with Julian's expectant gaze upon her, she whispered her truth. "I want to live, truly live." Her voice was quiet but sure. For the first time she allowed herself to want. A charged silence hung between them like the stillness before a storm. Then Julian stood, moving around the bar, stepping closer until the space between them was nothing but heat. In anticipation, Sarah felt the warmth of his presence, the scent of sea salt and woodsy cologne drifting over her. She didn't move, didn't want to move. "I want you, Sarah," he murmured, fingertips brushing a strand of golden hair from her face, threading through it with a touch that was both tender and deliberate. She didn't pull away. She couldn't, not when he leaned in, not when his lips met hers in a kiss that was both gentle and consuming. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a storm unraveling the ice Mark had left in her heart. It was the first real touch she had known in 2 years. Sarah clung to the edge of the bar for balance, letting herself drown in him. "Do you want to watch the stars?" Julian whispered against her lips when they finally broke apart, his voice low, filled with unspoken promises. "Just to watch the stars." Sarah nodded, stepping away from safety for the first time in a long time together. They left Sea Breeze, walking toward the harbor. Julian led her onto his yacht, a sleek white vessel resting beneath the moonlit sky. The sails were furled, but the deck stretched wide and open, a sanctuary above the waves. He guided her to sit beside him, an arm resting lightly around her shoulders. "Look up," he said, and she did. The stars spread endlessly above them, bright and untouched against the inky black of night. She had spent so long staring at the floor, at the past, at everything she had lost. But now, for the first time, she looked up, and it was breathtaking. For a moment they sat in silence, the only sounds the whisper of waves and the distant hum of the town. Then Julian turned to her, his eyes darkened with something deeper, something undeniable. "I don't just want to watch the stars with you," he murmured. His hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer. Sarah felt his breath against her cheek, and when he kissed her again, deeper, more insistent, she no longer thought of Mark, no longer thought of the 2 years she had wasted waiting for love that never came. With Julian, she forgot everything else. She only felt his touch, his warmth, his quiet need wrapped around her like the tide. And when he led her below deck, she let herself be carried away. That night, in the dimly lit cabin of Julian's yacht, they came together in a way that went beyond just the physical. Julian was the first man to truly touch her, to want her, to cherish her with a mix of passion and reverence, like she was something precious, not just a duty. or an obligation. His hands worshipped her, his lips traced her name between whispered confessions, and Sarah, for the first time in years, felt alive, felt wanted, felt free. She surrendered to him, letting him chase away the ghosts of her past. When it was over, she lay in his arms, the sound of waves lulling her into a rare sense of peace, but beneath the warmth and contentment a flicker of uncertainty remained. The morning light streamed through the cabin's window, casting golden hues over the tangled sheets. Sarah blinked awake, feeling the weight of an arm wrapped around her waist. Julian was still asleep beside her. His face relaxed, the sharp edges of his usual confidence softened in slumber. She studied him, dashed the tousled hair, the strong lines of his jaw, and her heartbeat stuttered. Happiness stirred within her, but so did the fear. What have I done? Am I ready for this? Memories of Mark crept in, a feeling invisible of being unwanted. But when she looked at Julian, she knew she didn't regret a single moment. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Would this last? Or was it just a fleeting dream? Her fingers trembled as she carefully untangled herself from his embrace. She dressed in silence, slipping out of the cabin as the sun rose over the horizon. By the time she reached the dock, the town was stirring, the first signs of morning coming to life. She walked away from the yacht, her emotions a tangled storm inside her chest. She didn't know what came next, but she knew she couldn't stay. But Julian Vance wasn't the kind of man who let things slip through his fingers. The moment she was gone, his eyes opened, a slow, knowing smile touched his lips. He sat up, gazing out the small window, watching the place where she had vanished into the dawn. You won't run from me, Sarah. His voice was quiet but certain, because now that he had found what he wanted in her, there was no way in hell he was letting her go. Chapter 4. Waves roaring from the past. Sarah stood behind the bar at Cooey's, the warm golden glow from the hanging rope lights illuminating her face, highlighting the soft warmth that had begun to take root in her ocean blue eyes. Though traces of hesitation still lingered, Heavenport remained as peaceful as ever, with the rhythmic crash of waves from the harbor and the salty sea breeze weaving through cobblestone streets, carrying the scent of the ocean into the cozy bar. 2 weeks had passed since that night on Julian Vance's yacht, the night she had for the first time felt the warmth of a man's touch, the first time she had known what it was like to be wanted after 2 years of feeling invisible. In her marriage to Mark Colton, she had left Julian that morning, happiness tangled with confusion in her heart, but he hadn't let her run for long. He pursued her, not loudly, not forcefully, but with a quiet persistence, like the tide that inevitably pulled her toward him. Julian had become a familiar presence at Sea Breeze, appearing every evening as her shift wound down, bringing stories of the sea and an irresistible energy. He took her on walks, short strolls along Havenport's beaches, moments when he'd lead her down to the docks to admire the sleek yachts of Vance Yachts, bathed in the golden hues of sunset. He left her small gifts, a shimmering white seashell from a recent voyage, a bracelet woven from nautical rope, little notes scribbled in his bold handwriting. I found this in a cove offshore. It reminded me of you, Sarah. Kept them in a small wooden box beneath the bar, though she refused to admit that every time she opened it her heart quickened. She was beginning to let him in, no longer shying away from his deep blue gaze, no longer pulling back when his fingers brushed hers as he made cocktails for her to taste. But the past, like an undertow, refused to let her go. It surged forward, roaring back into her life in the form of Mark Colton, the husband she thought was gone for good. Sarah wiped down the bar, her movements steady but her gaze occasionally drifting toward the window where the sea shimmered under the moonlight. Sea Breeze was livelier than usual tonight. A few sailors gathered in the far corner, a group of tourists from a docked yacht sipping their drinks by the window, soft murmurs of conversation blending with the clinking of glass. She wore her usual blue apron, her golden hair tied up high. But something had changed within her, a lightness she had never felt before, as if freedom had begun to seep into her soul, even if she still didn't know how to fully embrace it. Julian had done that, opened a door she had never dared to step through, and each time he appeared she felt herself inching closer to what he had once promised, a world full of wonders waiting for you. But tonight the air shifted, the warmth of Sea Breeze turned heavy, the easy hum of conversation faltering as the wooden door swung open, carrying with it a gust of cold wind that didn't belong. Sarah looked up, and her heart sank. The man standing in the doorway wasn't Julian. It was Mark. He looked worse than the last time she had seen him. Disheveled hair, unkempt, bloodshot eyes, heavy with liquor. His steps were unsteady, his grip tight around a half-empty beer bottle, his face drawn with something between regret and bitterness. For the first time in 2 years, Mark was looking at her with something resembling focus, but it was too late. Sarah's fingers curled around the rag in her hand, her breath quickening. Mark stumbled forward, ignoring the curious stares from the bar's patrons, and slammed his bottle down onto the wooden counter. Sarah, he rasped, his voice thick with alcohol. She said nothing. She only looked at him, her gaze cold, unyielding. Though her heart pounded violently in her chest, Mark exhaled heavily, gripping the edge of the bar like he needed it to stay upright. "I was wrong, Sarah," he slurred, his voice raw, as if he were forcing the words out. "I see it now. No one is as good as you, Lisa. She's nothing compared to you." Sarah froze, not because she was moved, but because she never thought she'd hear those words come from his lips. She remembered the night she had waited for him alone in that tiny house near the docks, the meal she had made that had gone untouched, the whispered "maybe tomorrow" when she had reached for him. She remembered the months before their wedding, when she had caught him sneaking around with Lisa, the answer from the rusty anchor, the woman he had chosen first, before his mother had pushed him into marrying Sarah. She had forgiven him, she had tried, but Mark had never truly seen her, not in the 2 years she had been his wife, and now he wanted to undo it all with a drunken confession. Sarah's voice was steady when she finally spoke. "You chose her before you ever chose me." "Mark it over." Mark swayed, blinking, as if he hadn't expected that answer, his jaw clenched. "You don't understand," he growled, his voice rising, drawing more attention from the surrounding patrons. "I made a mistake. Lisa was nothing. You were the best thing I ever had. Come back to me." Sarah stepped back, her grip tightening on the bar for control. "No, Mark," she said coolly, her words like ice cutting through the tension. "You had your chance 2 years to see me, and you never did. I don't need you anymore." Mark's eyes darkened, a flicker of anger sparked beneath his drunken haze. His hand slammed onto the bar, rattling the bottles. "So that's it," he sneered. "You think you're better than me now?" Sarah's heart pounded. She forced herself to stay calm, to not let him drag her back into the past. "Go home, Mark." Her voice was firm. "There's nothing left for you here." The muscles in his jaw twitched for a second. He looked like he might say more, might fight harder, but then his shoulders slumped, the last of his pride crumbling without another word. Mark grabbed his bottle and staggered toward the door, shoving it open with unnecessary force. The cold night swallowed him whole. Silence fell over sea breeze, the weight of the encounter lingering in the air. Sarah let out a slow breath, forcing her hands to steady. But before she could process what had just happened, the door opened again, and this time it wasn't Mark, it was Julian. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room, instantly locking onto her. Concern flickered in his gaze as he strode toward her, his presence solid, steady, erasing the chill Mark had left behind. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice low. Sarah hesitated. Then finally she nodded. "I am now." Julian didn't press further, but the way he looked at her, like he could see right through the walls she was trying to rebuild, told her he wasn't letting this go, and for the first time she wasn't sure she wanted him to. Mark slammed his hand onto the bar, his beer bottle rolling across the wooden counter as his voice cracked with rage. "Who do you think you are, Sarah?" He spat, his words dripping with bitterness. "A woman no one wanted to touch for 2 years, and now you think you're something just because you've latched onto a rich guy." His insult echoed through the bar, silencing the chatter for a brief moment before hushed murmurs spread like ripples through the crowd. Sarah felt heat rush to her face, not from shame, but from the fury that ignited within her. Fury at his words, fury at herself for ever letting him hurt her for so long. But before she could respond, the door to sea breeze swung open once more, and a tall, commanding figure stepped inside. Julian Vance. He entered like a force of nature, a gust of ocean wind cutting through the tension, his deep blue eyes scanning the room before locking onto Mark with a cold, piercing gaze. Julian looked the same as he always did, crisp white shirt top, buttons undone revealing sun-kissed skin, dark brown hair tousled from the wind. But tonight something was different. Gone was the carefree charm. What remained was sharp, unwavering determination. Without hesitation, Julian strode straight to the bar, reaching Sarah in seconds. He didn't stop, didn't ask, he simply pulled her behind him, a silent shield standing between her and the man who had once claimed to love her. "She's worth more than anything you've ever had," Julian said, his voice low, steady, yet laced with an unspoken threat. "Leave before I make you regret staying." Mark took an involuntary step back, his anger wavered, momentarily eclipsed by something else, something dangerously close to fear. He opened his mouth, ready to hurl another insult, but the sound of quiet laughter rippled through the crowd, not at Julian, at him. Sailors and tourists alike watched with amused disdain, seeing him for what he was, a man who had thrown away something good and now stood there bitter and empty. Mark's jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists, but in the end, he wasn't brave enough to fight a battle he had already lost. "You'll regret this," he muttered toward Sarah, but his voice lacked its former arrogance. Then, with an unsteady gait, he turned, stumbling toward the door, knocking his beer bottle to the ground, the glass shattering, a fitting end to his broken pride. Laughter followed him out into the cold night, and when the door finally swung shut behind him, Sarah exhaled, and for the first time, the wind that brushed against her skin didn't carry pain, it carried relief. Julian turned to face her, the icy sharpness in his eyes softening the moment they met hers. "He was never worthy of you," he murmured. His voice was warm, steady, a quiet reassurance wrapped in silk and steel. His hand found her shoulder, a simple touch, yet it sent a wave of calm through her trembling frame. Sarah stood there, still catching her breath, but when she looked into Julian's deep blue eyes that held nothing but sincerity and unyielding protectiveness, she felt something shift inside her. For 2 years, she had felt like a ghost, invisible, unseen, unwanted. But now, standing in the warmth of Julian's presence, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. She leaned into him just slightly, letting the solid strength of his chest anchor her, and for the first time she felt safe, felt cherished. Something Mark had never given her, no matter how much she had wished for it. The hum of conversation returned to Sebers, but Sarah no longer heard it. There was only the steady thrum of her heartbeat, the quiet comfort of Julian's touch. He didn't leave. He stood there, his hand lingering, his gaze unwavering. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice lower now, softer, genuine concern woven into every syllable. Sarah nodded, her lips curving into a faint but real smile. "I am now." Julian smiled, but there was something deeper behind it, something that spoke of promises he had yet to make. "No one will ever hurt you again, Sarah, not while I'm here." Sarah met his gaze, and for the first time in a long time her heart pounded, not in fear, but in anticipation. Something inside her was stirring, growing, a feeling she wasn't ready to name, but she knew it had started with him. Mark had left it, taking with him the cold, empty path she had been shackled to for far too long, and now, under Julian's steady gaze, she felt something new rising within her, a tide pulling her toward the unknown, toward warmth, toward freedom, toward him. Chapter 5. The sea calls her name. Sarah stood on the golden sands of Havenport, her bare feet sinking into the cool water as the gentle waves lapped at the shore. The sea breeze tousled her golden hair, carrying the familiar scent of salt and freedom she had known her entire life. But today Havenport was no longer the cage that trapped her. It was the place where she stood free and alive beside the man who had pulled her from the shadows of her past. Julian Vance, with eyes as deep as the ocean and a smile as warm as the midday sun over the sea, stepped toward her, his fingers intertwining with hers in a silent promise he would never let her drift away again. 2 months had passed since that night at Sebers, when Julian had shielded her from Mark Colton's bitter insults and declared that she was worth more than anything he had ever lost. From that moment, there was no hesitation between them, no careful steps, no cautious distance. Julian had brought her into his world, a world she had never dared to dream of during the 2 years she spent as a ghost in her marriage. He took her on short sailing trips aboard Vance yachts, where they watched the sun melt into the horizon golden light. Spilling across the water like a masterpiece, he arranged candlelit dinners on the deck where they sipped wine and laughed over the little things in life. And in the quiet of the night he pulled her into his arms, loving her with both tenderness and fierce passion, until she forgot the insecurities Mark had planted in her. Sarah learned to live for herself for the first time, unchained from the past and the burden of the Colton family's reputation. She no longer feared the whispers of the town. Those murmurs that once made her hesitate before signing the divorce papers were now nothing more than passing breezes, powerless to hold her back. She changed. Gone were the plain blue aprons of sea breeze. Now she chose flowing summer dresses. She let her hair cascade freely, instead of tying it back, and her sapphire eyes sparkled with a light she recognized whenever she looked in the mirror. Julian had done that. He hadn't just given her freedom, he had given her a reason to love herself, to believe she was worthy of happiness. Tonight, they were once again aboard Julian's yacht, anchored just beyond Havenport's harbor, where the town's lights were no more than soft flickers in the distance. Sarah stood on the deck, her hands resting on the wooden railing, gazing up at the night sky, a vast canvas dotted with 1,000 glimmering stars like scattered pearls against the dark expanse. She wore a light white dress, the fabric billowing in the salty breeze, and for the first time she felt at peace, a peace she had never known while being Mark's wife. Julian stepped out from the cabin holding 2 glasses of wine. He looked effortless in an unbuttoned white shirt and casual shorts, but there was something different in his expression. Tonight, something serious, something rare. What are you looking at? He asked, his deep voice blending with the rhythmic crash of waves as he handed her a glass. Sarah smiled, taking a slow sip. The stars, they're beautiful. Julian stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, his eyes never leaving her. They are, he agreed, but not as beautiful as you. She let out a quiet laugh, a soft pink blush warming her cheeks, but this time she didn't turn away. She had grown used to his words, and she liked them more than she dared to admit. They sat together on the deck, their glasses resting on a small table between them, watching the midnight waves. But there was a tension in the air, gentle yet undeniable, a sense that something important was about to happen. Julian placed his hand over hers, his fingers lacing with hers, and when she turned to look at him, she saw it, that depth in his gaze, the way his blue eyes held something more than affection, something unwavering. Sarah, he said, his voice steady, I want you by my side, not just at sea, but in life. Before she could speak, he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box, and when he opened it, beneath the silver moonlight, a single pearl glowed from the ring inside. Sarah was stunned, her breath hitching as Julian knelt before her, his hand gripping hers firmly. I know you've been through dark days, he said, his voice deep and steady, but I want to give you days filled with light, days where you never doubt your worth, never fear the past. Marry me. Sarah, tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain, but from overwhelming happiness. She looked at him, the man who had pulled her from the cold shadows of Mark, who had shown her that she was worth more than she had ever believed, and she nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, Julian, I will. A radiant smile lit up Julian's face, the brightest she had ever seen. He slipped the pearl ring onto her finger, the stone gleaming like a promise that would last forever. Pulling her into his arms, he kissed her beneath the vast starry sky, a deep lingering kiss filled with all the love and longing he had for her. Sarah clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt, and she knew this wasn't just another night on the yacht. This was the beginning of a new life, a life where she was no longer the abandoned wife, but the center of a man's world. They married just a week later in the simplest way, just as their love had been genuine, unpretentious, yet deeply profound, on the shores of Havenport, where the waves and wind bore witness to their vows. Sarah walked barefoot across the sand, her white dress flowing with the evening breeze, her hair cascaded naturally down her shoulders, her sapphire eyes sparkling under the golden sunset. Julian stood at the altar, nothing elaborate, just a small arch made of driftwood and white cloth waiting for her with unwavering devotion. In his deep blue eyes he wore a crisp white shirt and linen pants, looking at her as though she was everything he had ever dreamed of. There were no extravagant flowers, no grand orchestra, only the sound of waves crashing gently against the shore, and the sea breeze humming a melody of its own. A few close friends from Sea Breeze attended along with Sarah's father Thomas, who had sobered up for the first time in years to witness his daughter's wedding. A few sailors Julian had known from his voyages stood nearby smiling at the couple who had found love amidst the tides. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the sea, they spoke their vows. "Sarah," Julian said, his deep voice carrying over the sound of the waves, his hands holding hers tightly, "I promise to love you, to protect you, and to take you to every horizon you wish to see. You are my ocean." Sarah smiled, tears welling up again. "Julian, you have given me freedom and a love I never knew existed. I promise to stand by you forever." They exchanged rings, hers a pearl ring symbolizing the depths of the sea, his a simple silver band, and when Julian kissed her, the waves seemed to cheer for them, crashing against the shore in a triumphant roar, blending with the applause of their small audience. But amidst their happiness, a lone figure stood in the distance, hidden behind the pine trees lining the beach. Mark Colton. He had returned to Havenport after hearing whispers of Sarah's wedding, jealousy burning inside him when he learned she had found happiness in another man's arms. From afar, he watched Julian holding her hand, saw her beaming in her white dress, a smile he had never seen on her face when she was his wife. Memories flooded his mind. Nights he had chosen Lisa over Sarah, times he had ignored the meal she prepared, the way he had left her alone in that cold, empty house. And now, with Lisa gone and his life in ruins, he realized too late that he had lost the best thing he ever had. Mark clenched his fists, wanting to storm onto the beach, to tear apart the moment, to take back what he had so carelessly thrown away. But then Julian's piercing gaze met his from across the sand like an unyielding tide ready to drag him under. Mark hesitated, and then, defeated, he turned and walked away from Havenport, carrying his regrets into an uncertain future, leaving Sarah forever in Julian's embrace. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, Sarah and Julian stood together on the shore, hands entwined, gazing at the dark sea shimmering beneath the moonlight. "Are you happy?" Julian murmured, his voice soft. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Happier than ever." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, and together they walked toward the yard, fought toward the life awaiting them, a life where Sarah was no longer a woman bound by her past, but a woman truly, completely free, a woman who was loved, a woman who belonged to Julian forever. Chapter 6. The Harbor of Peace. Havenport was now a picture of serenity in Sarah Colton's eyes, or rather Sarah Vance, as she had called herself ever since marrying Julian a year ago. The small seaside town still held the beauty of gentle waves rolling onto golden sands, yacht lights twinkling in the harbor, and the salty ocean breeze drifting through its cobblestone streets. But to Sarah, Havenport was no longer the gilded cage she had once felt trapped in. It had become her true harbor, the place where she lived in a seaside cottage with Julian, the man who had transformed her life from lonely stagnation into a journey filled with love and freedom. Their cottage stood just steps away from the Havenport docks, built on a small patch of land that jutted out into the ocean. The house, with its dark wooden walls and large windows overlooking the sea, had become a sanctuary. Inside, a fireplace crackled warmly, handmade rugs softened the wooden floors, and artifacts from their travels decorated the space. A large seashell from a Mexican bay, a small painting of ocean waves from an artist in France. Over the past year, Sarah and Julian had turned this place into a real home, nothing like the cold, silent house she had once shared with Mark Colton. Next to the cottage, Sarah had opened a small coffee stall on the docks, Sea Breeze Brew, where she served warm lattes and homemade pastries to sailors, tourists, and locals. Julian still ran Vance Yachts, his luxury yacht company, but he always made time for her, waking up early to help her brew coffee before she opened, coming home in time to watch the sunset with her from their porch. Standing behind the counter at Sea Breeze Brew, Sarah expertly crafted a latte for an old sailor, a regular who often told her tales of the sea. Her golden hair fell naturally over her shoulders, no longer tied up in a high ponytail like before, and her ocean blue eyes now shone with a quiet confidence that had once been absent. She wore a soft white sweater and jeans, the pearl ring Julian had given her on the night of his proposal glistening on her finger, a constant reminder of the love he had given her over the past year. Sarah had changed, no longer the abandoned wife living in the shadow of the past. She was now a woman who had learned to love herself through the unwavering devotion of a man who never let her forget her worth. Together, they had explored the world on Julian's yacht, venturing from the tranquil coves of Havenport to distant shores he had only dreamed of. They had sailed to hidden bays in Maine, where the water was so clear she could see schools of fish beneath the surface. They had anchored near a wild beach in South Carolina, where they collected sea shells and laughed under the golden sun. Every journey was a memory. Dinners on the deck, with candlelight flickering, long nights spent listening to the waves, and the way Julian held her, loved her with a passion that never faded. But their love wasn't just passion, it was companionship, a bond unshaken by time or distance. Julian often held her hand as they watched the sea, whispering, "You are my whole world," and every time he said it, Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest, as if every wound from the past had truly healed. That evening, after closing sea breeze brew, Sarah walked home along the beach, the cool sand beneath her bare feet. Julian had promised to meet her on the yacht for a short evening sail, a small ritual they kept every weekend. She spotted him standing on the deck, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun, his deep blue eyes lighting up when he saw her. He wore a white linen shirt, unbuttoned at the top, and shorts, a glass of wine in his hand. His signature smile stretched across his lips as she stepped onto the boat. "You look more like a sea goddess every day," he teased, pulling her into his arms and pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Sarah chuckled, leaning into his warmth. "And you're still my pirate." They set sail, the yacht gliding effortlessly out of the Havenport harbor, heading toward the open sea, where the sunset painted golden streaks across the water. Sarah sat beside Julian on the deck, her hand entwined with his, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. This past year had not only been about exploring the world, but also about discovering herself. She had learned to love herself through Julian's love. He wasn't just her husband, he was the man who had taught her to stand tall before the prying eyes of Havenport, to smile genuinely instead of out of politeness, to believe she deserved every ounce of happiness he gave her. "What are you thinking about?" Julian's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone gentle. Sarah turned to him, smiling. "About this past year, about you, about us. I never thought I could be this happy." Julian squeezed her hand, his eyes gleaming. "Neither did I, Sarah. You are everything I've ever wanted." He pulled her close, kissing her beneath the golden hues of the sunset, a deep, lingering kiss filled with the love and companionship they had built over the past year. Sarah held on to him, breathing in his warmth, knowing this was not just a moment, this was forever. When night fell, they anchored in the open sea, where the sky was dark yet glittering with endless stars. Julian stood, pulling her to the center of the deck, and turned on a soft melody from the yacht's speakers, a slow, soothing tune as gentle as the waves. He wrapped an arm around her waist, leading her into a quiet dance beneath the moonlight, their steps syncing with the rhythm of the ocean. Sarah laughed as he twirled her, a pure, uninhibited joy filling her heart. "You know," Julian murmured, pressing his forehead against hers, "when they stopped, I never thought I'd find my entire world in one person until I met you." Sarah smiled, happy tears glistening in her eyes. "And you gave me the world, Julian." They sat together on the deck, leaning against each other, watching the vast ocean stretch into the horizon. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, her fingers laced with his, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath his shirt. A year ago, she had been a woman left behind, trapped in the cage of family expectations and Mark's indifference. Now she was Sarah Vance, a woman who had found her confidence, who was loved beyond measure, who no longer carried the shadows of her past. Julian had changed her, not just with his love, but by showing her that she was worth everything that she could live for herself. In the distance, Havenport's lights twinkled like tiny stars against the coastline, but Sarah no longer looked at them with fear or hesitation. She looked forward toward the open sea that she and Julian would continue to explore together under the moonlight. They held each other close, their breaths mingling in the cool night air, and Sarah knew she had finally found her true harbor, not in the name Havenport, but in Julian's heart. He was her home, her ocean, her forever. This story of Sarah and Julian is a journey of liberation and self-discovery. The greatest lesson from this chapter in the entire story is that true love does not just heal past wounds, but also helps us uncover our own worth. Sarah learned that she did not need to live to please others, did not need to sacrifice herself to hold on to a relationship that was never meant for her. Through Julian's love, she found the confidence and freedom to live for herself, rather than being bound by family honor or Mark's indifference. Life, like the sea, is vast and full of surprises, and sometimes the most important thing is to leave the old harbor behind and sail toward a new one where you truly belong. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials, and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share the story with your friends to never miss out on touching and meaningful stories. Subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.